making sure that this session is recorded. Now, when you are in the unit and on the Moodle, this is the main platform that you're going to have, which is primarily going to give you everything in terms of teaching, learning, and reading experience. So, one second.
Okay.
Now, when we look at these, one of the things that I use to be able to teach this particular course will be looking at what is called the US or unit specification. Now, this is a part of the unit that we've extracted from the course handbook, and this gives us all the details that we need to look at to help make you study the unit. So I just can't teach you anything in managing people, but what we want to be able to do is cover the aims and objectives, the learning outcomes, and the assessment criteria, which are predominantly given by the awarding organization to say that this is the unit and this is the contents of the unit that you need to study. Now, when we teach and deliver the qualification, we are going, and in the individual qualification, the individual units, we are going to do a number of sessions to cover this up. And this will be, sessions that will, be as per the learning outcomes. So every session that we do in terms of Zoom meeting is going to cover one learning outcome, and then that will be one session. So if it has 4 learning outcomes in this unit, there'll be 5 sessions covering the unit. 4 will be covering the learning outcomes, and the 5th session, what we are going to do is discuss the assignment brief in detail. So there's an assignment brief which is also available, and this is the assignment brief that you will need to attempt at the end of the unit, and they will always be labeled as A, B towards the end. So when I click on this, the learning outcomes and the assessment criteria grids that you see actually change into what are called tasks and activities that you have to do in order to be able to complete and achieve this particular unit. So this would be something that we will debrief you on and kind of go through as a session like I'm doing now, and they would essentially help you understand how to put together the evidence for this unit to be able to achieve it by submitting an assignment. The assignments sometimes tend to be a combination of, asking you to draw up a PowerPoint presentation, a case study, or maybe an academically referenced and written document. But they generally tend to be these 2-3 types in terms of how the assessment is to be done or how the evidence has to be presented in order to meet the requirements for the assignment. Now, it is very also clearly given towards the end of the assignment brief. It will say presentation with references, speaker notes of 500 words, and a report, which is basically a Word document report that you will prepare, and that would be about 3,500 words. Now, we will get into this in a bit later, because obviously today we are going to start the unit in terms of a bit of an introduction and also look at discussing the first learning outcome in a bit more detail. So all the presentations that you are going to see are going to be labeled as LO1, LO2, or similarly like that. And these presentation slides would be essentially PowerPoint slides that will cover the indicative content and the learning outcomes. So this is the indicative content which is to be covered in the first learning outcome, which is given here. And then all the assessment criteria like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5 in this case would be covered by discussing and looking at some videos and obviously discussing them through the use of PowerPoint presentation. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
So today we are going to start off this particular unit, and what we're going to do is essentially start off with a bit of an introduction on what is managing people, why do we need to study this unit in health and social care, and then go into some of the assessment criteria which are required to cover the learning outcome 1. Now, answering your question in long shot, when do you submit assignments? So the way that I would suggest a study plan to you would be that there are going to be 2 sessions every week. These 2 sessions will help you cover a unit in about 3 weeks, because there are going to be 5 sessions for this unit. So we are going to do LO1 today, LO2 tomorrow. There'll be LO3 and LO4 next week. And then the subsequent week, there'll only be 1 session, which will be a discussion on the assignment. Now, all these sessions are interactive. If you do not, say, for example, understand anything, we need to do discussion so that you are able to get a good grasp of what is required to be understood in each of the learning outcomes and thereby completing it as a unit. Now, once
Okay, sir,
the
I get you.
okay, and once the assignment discussion session finishes in the week after the next, then you have 2 weeks to be able to submit the assignment, at least a draft of the assignment, which we can see. We can then give you feedback on that you have done these things right. This is okay. This is okay. This is not okay. And in places where we do find there are gap areas or areas wherein you need to do fill in the blanks, we'll give you directive feedback to tell you exactly what needs to be done so that you are able to submit the assignment. We will assess it and you pass it. Now,
Okay, sir, I get you completely.
Great. Parallelly, what will happen is, so next week, for example, we have only one session, but after that, we'll start another unit. You will continue doing the assignment and the same process would then repeat. So typically speaking, in about 18 weeks, you should be completing this course with us on a very fast track basis, because generally what we do is do one session a week, cover one learning outcome. There are some reading articles, journals, or other areas that we would suggest that you go and read so that you get more knowledge, because in the presentation and the slides that we do, you are going to get, I would say 60 to 70% of the content required, but it will still require at level 7 for you to be able to go in and do a bit more research as far as, the topics are concerned. So because you're doing it on a fast track, that is why there are 2 sessions. If you feel that you have, if I do see that you have adjusted nicely in terms of the first unit and you've submitted your assignments, if required, we can also increase the number of sessions to 3. And that would mean that will further shortcut the time in terms of you completing the course. But that is all dependent on how you're progressing. You're not feeling stressed, and obviously you are able to cope with what is being discussed, and that would allow you to nicely not just cover the course but gain knowledge and obviously understand new concepts, theoretical frameworks that are required to be studied in this particular program. Is that okay?
Okay, sir.
Good stuff. Yes, so let's start off with maybe the bit of discussion on the unit itself. And what I'm going to do is just pull out the unit spec, which is on an offline mode because I've got them separately on my Mac. So here, let me pull out the unit spec first. Here we go. So shift you over to the unit spec for a couple of minutes just to discuss the bits and pieces in terms of why and what is this unit all about. And then we'll get going with the first learning outcome, which is required to be covered today. So this particular document is quite an important document because, it will help us lay the foundation in terms of what is to be taught, how this unit has to be studied. Now, if you just briefly look at, what is managing people, there are different types of resources that we generally see, which are available or at your discretion when we talk about, essentially, let's say, natural resources, administrative resources, financial resources. One of the resource which is used and obviously quite important in today's context is people. So when we talk about managing people, we are going to be talking about people in general. Now, the way this unit has been structured, has been named, is essentially should have given you a sense that this is all about human resource management. Because when we talk about people and managing people or resources at the organizational level, we are essentially talking about how do we look at doing the function of what is called HRM. Now, why this is quite evident, if I look at the unit aim essentially looks at mentioning things like that the learner needs to understand processes involved in recruitment, management, development of people, but the context that in which we are studying this unit is health and social care sector. So human resource management or managing people or working in teams tends to be a generic unit which falls under what is called the human resource management or HRM as a function within any organization. But because you're doing a health and social care management course, so what we want to do is not study this unit generically, but study this unit from a point of view of how HR or managing people or HR management essentially is done within a organization which is providing services to patients, members of public, or any sort of services like healthcare services, mental health services, services to vulnerable people, disabled people, but within the health and social care sector. So when we talk about this, we are looking at resource management, but within resource management, looking at managing people as a resource. And in this case, we're going to be looking at studying what are the tools and techniques which are required for you at the management level to understand that how, if you're given a supervisory responsibility, you are a manager of a department, you work and run your own business, or you work within a large organization wherein you are responsible for HR part of the function within that organization, then stepping into management, because it's a master's level qualification, how would you go about managing resources? How would you keep them happy? How you would keep them motivated? How are you going to look at wages, their compliances with legislation, the organization's compliance with legislation, and how you're going to, in general, look at people being productive, people being efficient, and people helping the organization meet its goal at the end of the month, or at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the year. So this unit is all about human resource management. Here we are going to be focused on studying key activities of HRM, which include recruitment selection, looking at interviews, looking at performance management, reward management, looking at discipline. Sometimes here in the UK, we say discipline management or disciplinary procedures when HR has to get into. Then how do we look at unionization? So when you're dealing with issues with union, those are the kind of bits that we will look at covering within this unit. But all of it is going to be contextualized and covered with relevance and requirements to health and social care sector. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So the health and social care describes every healthcare and social center, or it's only about the hospitals, patients and stuff?
Well, when I talk about health and social care sector, so very good question that you've asked. And I had this, chart, which is with me ready because I knew this could be a question. This is how you generally see the health and social care sector organized in the UK. So if I look at your home country, typically in our countries, we have what is called the Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health will have a minister who's with the portfolio. He looks after that. And obviously underneath that, you have a department. And under the Health and Social Care Department, or Healthcare Department, or Healthcare as a ministry, you will have hospitals, trusts, charities, private, public sector organizations, various type of things, which will be basically providing health and social care services, clinical services, which are operative services like operations and other bits, and then mental health care services to people or members of the public in that country. So in the UK, this department is basically considered or called as Department of Health and Social Care. There's a secretary, who basically manages. Obviously here we don't have ministers, but, the Department of Health Care or Health Secretary typically, would basically look and his department would kind of look at, work towards, let's say, creating policies, procedures, and, various legislation and acts which are passed in Parliament under Stephen Barclay. So Steve Barclay is the Ministry of, he's the Health Secretary in the UK. He then works with his department, essentially works with a number of key bodies which provides services like if somebody needs to undergo an operation, somebody needs help with, say, for example, welfare side of things, somebody is mentally challenged, somebody is disabled. There are various departments and organizations which will work under the Department of Health and Social Care. Some of them are going to be regulators. So they are going to be independent of the government. They're going to be regulating the workings of the various organizations in this sector, whether it's private or public. They will do inspections, they will do monitoring. Some of them are going to be charitable organizations. Some of them are going to be organizations which get semi-autonomous. That means they are part public, part private. They get funding from the government, like Oxfam, Macmillan, Christie's as a charity. But they are working towards and with the Department of Health and Social Care to be able to provide better services. Things like research on cancer, which is happening, or research on, cardiovascular diseases in terms of heart, diseases in particular, which Christie does. or the Heart Foundation does. They are also agencies which will be under the Department of Health and Social Care. So you have NHS England, you have the primary care trusts, you have advisory bodies, you have legal bodies, you have bodies which are basically let's say, put out information to the members of public. For example, during COVID pandemic, PHE, which is Public Health England, main responsibility was to put out messages in public interest, things like face mask, social distancing, and these were key messages created by PHE or Public Health England to ensure that people are aware of and have enough and adequate information to be able to save themselves from contracting COVID-19 as a virus. And then at the ground level, we see surgeries or GP surgeries here, dentists, pharmacies, we see pharmacies in general, we see community welfare setups and centers, and you see charities and volunteering organizations which work together with the Department of Health, the National Health Service, the primary care trusts, and the clinical commissioning groups or CCGs to be able to deliver this on the front line. Now, it's okay to say that I'm the clinical director in the National Health Service. I'm probably the third or the fourth top man as far as the National Health Service is concerned in the UK. You might be the health minister or health secretary, whatever. But who provides this service at the front line? It's the doctors, the nurses, as we call them, health and social care practitioners. So how many people which are grouped together in this category, which work within the sector as a care worker, as a nurse, as a health and social care worker, as a therapist, as an occupational therapist, as dinner ladies, as surgeons, as doctors, as consultants, as therapists, people who work on supply and contractual work, people who might be in administration roles, somebody who physiotherapist could be a person who helps people recover from injuries, people who provide counseling to people when they face trauma or have had an accident and they need to recover from those life-threatening injuries, support given by any such person working towards providing a service which is in the health and social care sector would be termed as a health and social care practitioner. And these are the various types of people. Sorry, go on. Go on. You're saying
Actually,
something.
I got you.
Okay. And these are the various types of people which will work within this sector to be able to deliver these services to the members of public. So here, when we look at different roles, different types of people working within this sector, that is what we need to be able to cover in this particular unit, which is managing people in health and social care. Is that okay? So the idea is how to understand if you are going to be management and you have the responsibility to be able to, manage people or direct people or delegate jobs to people and manage their roles and responsibilities. You need to understand recruitment process, selection process, interview process, firing process, redundancy process, performance process, reward, carrot and stick approach. If I say reward management process, union process, or any litigation or legal process which comes in, and how to use these processes to be able to manage people effectively is what we are going to study in this particular unit. Now, there are 4 learning outcomes. So this is something which might be new to you, but just very briefly, because it's the first unit you're studying. Basically, when you study these units, there are going to be what are called key descriptors. Now, if you see understand, that means it is going to be theoretical because it is asking you to understand what is required. And that is where it will be theoretical from a point of view of, understanding that outcome. In certain cases, in certain units, you'll also have descriptors like be able to. That means you'll require to be able to put into practice those things that you're learning, whether it's theoretical things or frameworks or key attributes of the unit or the course. And that would require you to quote practical examples. So for example, if it says be able to develop a workforce training plan, just thinking out of the blue. Now, if it says be able to develop and implement a workforce training plan, that means you'll have to physically prepare a document basically you will need to prepare a document which will talk about how staff, employees, contractors, and people who are working within your company would be trained on a particular thing. For example, the hospital buys a new X-ray machine or a new MRI scanner. there are radiographers and people who are working within the hospital already, but because it's a newer equipment and they need to be made aware of how to use it, how to provide, use the functions of it and then provide services. There might be a training that you would need to do. So because it says be able to, that means you need to create a training document, which is going to be done as a Word document. And that is where you're putting things into practice and showing application, not just theoretical knowledge that you're getting from the unit, but in those cases, you are going to be required to, create those documents as assignments, and that would be requirement of the unit. So key descriptors are important in this unit. It is essentially going to be understand. That means mostly you need to understand what is the context, what is being covered, and how it will be used in a real life situation. And that is where this particular unit is going to be purely theoretical. Now, each learning outcome has a number of assessment criteria that we need to go through. These would also then have some indicative idea in terms of what is required to be covered in it. I just can't say that, okay, if I talk about factors involving a planning and what kind of planning is required to do recruitment in, say, health and social care, then we need to talk about things like human resource requirement, job descriptions. We need to talk about person specification, qualification, experience, and how you would go about advertising it. So this bit is critical because the awarding body then gives us a very clear idea of what actually needs to be taught to the learner and what needs to be covered as a syllabus, or let's say content, as to say that, okay, this is what I have understood by studying this learning outcome. And we will do this through the route of looking at presentations, obviously, because you're doing it distance learning, and I can use so many different forms to discuss with you. So one of them is going to be live sessions like this. In the live sessions, I'm going to take use of presentations. I might show you some videos. There might be a discussion on certain topics by use of case studies. And in some cases, I will ask you to go and do a bit of self-study by reading an article or a handout, which I will provide. And that would cover and give you more details about what's being discussed today in the live session. Is that okay?
Okay, sir.
Good stuff. Now let's look at, so this unit summarily wise, there is no grading in this, it's pass. We won't obviously let you fail. There are 4 learning outcomes. So we're going to look at 5 sessions. The unit has 20 credits, and obviously.
Sir, I'd like to ask a question. How much do we have to cover in a significant one lecture? For example, you're lecturing me about stuff and I am understanding whatever you are saying, but
Sure.
How much is the content that we have to cover in one lecture? Because I know there is certain capacity to which a person can understand, and everything is new to me. That's why I just need to ask this question.
Most lectures would tend to be 45 minutes to an hour long, and they will be sufficient for you to cover the learning outcome that we are discussing. Because the way the unit is taught and obviously delivered, there is a bit of a structure and a balance that the awarding organization also puts in, because they don't cram too much of material into it in each learning outcome. Exactly. And the idea is that we should be able to, if we do feel that, the lecture is having a lot of things to discuss, then in some cases I would do it and break it down into part 1, and then next day we'll do part 2, but just cover one learning outcome. Is that okay?
Say I'd most likely to want to go this way, because this way would be more convenient and easier for me. So once I pick up the pace, are you hearing me?
Yes, definitely.
Once I pick up the pace and once I get along with you, then we can even speed that up. But for now, I think some information that I can grasp is necessary, and others we can do in parts and stuff.
That's perfectly okay. And I think that is one of the reasons why we start off all learners on the courses with 1 unit. And the first unit, helps you to understand what pace you need to keep up with, or, at least plan at your end, so that you are able to cope and understand the requirements of the course. Now, there are bits and pieces that I will go through in the slides. But these slides, I'm not going to read through the slides. I'm going to talk to you about the information which is required for you to understand each of the assessment criteria in the learning outcomes. And then towards the end of the presentation, you would generally see that there will be some further reading, asked of you. Now, This does not mean that you need to read all the articles, all the journals, and some of them might be paid subscriptions, some of them will be free. But essentially, the idea would be to read a particular document to get a practical understanding of what has been taught and delivered in the lecture. Is that okay? So the slides tend to be quite worded. Don't get me wrong on that, because from what our experiences of for the last 9-10 years is that a lot of learners who come in and study qualifications with us, they are going to be looking at studying it as a directive study because it's through distance learning. And 85 to 90% of the information that they are going to get on the unit, on the course, on the subject that they are studying is going to come from our material, which is updated every day.
Okay, I get you.
So that is why the slides are worded. But if you don't go into any academic book, so in your case, for say, for example, for managing people, because this is the first lecture, I want it to be a bit detailed simply because you would get an introduction of the unit, and obviously some of the questions that you're asking are quite relevant and they will help you settle into the course nicely. I believe these should have been answered by Mr. Zafar when he had done the induction. But if he hasn't come across those, or if these questions didn't come across then I'm happy to take them so that you understand how the course is going to be run. Now, there are 2 books that we have which are recommended by the awarding body. And these 2 books we have provided. These are traditional books, that you would normally get from a library. But because you're doing distance learning and we deliver it through this route, all the books that we will be able to provide are going to be through PDFs or e-books, as we call them. Now, there are books which are, and this is, if you want to buy a printed version of this book, it might cost you a certain amount, but it's the exact same book that you will pick up from a shelf in the library, which will be available for you to study. And this book and these books, which will be there for each of the unit, there'll be at least 1 or 2, or in some cases even 3 or 4 books would be there because they are relevant to the content which is being taught in the unit. So should you later on decide that I need to do my assignment, and obviously I need to get some examples, I need to look at frameworks, I need to look at a bit more detail, we wouldn't recommend that you go about and do Google or just go into Googling. The idea would be to read some of the relevant pages of the book, which will help you ping out examples and maybe better your understanding of what the task is asking you to do. Now, these books are big books in the sense very heavy, because they are 4, 5, 6, 800, and I think one of the books in your course is even 1300 pages long. You're not expected to study all the pages in the book because some of the chapters might not be relevant. Simply because the awarding body, the way they put the qualification across, they are not going to, have this based on a particular book. They are going to base it on certain key aspects, which is what you are going to refer to when you read these books to get more detail. So when you look at the books and we talk about...
I'm not able to find these books in printed form in Islam, but everywhere, anywhere.
You will be able to find them definitely, simply because when you look at the unit specification of the unit towards the end, these books have details which are given. And if I pick one up and obviously just put it up on Google, you'll be able to buy them off Amazon or Pearson or any other publisher, and these books definitely would be available. It is not a case of buying it, it's a case of reading it. All these books are free.
About internet and in PDF files, you guys are already sending me, so that's not a problem. I was asking that I'm currently residing in capital, obviously, so I don't think there would be no bookstore publishing or just selling these books. What do you say about it, as you guys have experienced for almost many years?
This question is irrelevant to me, if I put it this way. Why would you want to buy a book? Yes, if you want to buy them and have them for future reference, by all means, you can buy a printed version of the book. But for the purposes of studying the course, and basically while you're actually looking at making use of the book, that's the whole idea, that we have provided these books to you on, on the Moodle, so that you don't need to go outside and look for these books to study. And that is why they are integrated.
Okay, I get that, yeah.
Is that okay? I might have a library, the spare prints, for example, Harry's book, which has come out, and I'm curious and I want to read it. Obviously, there's a online version available free, but obviously it's not conducive for me to read online. And what I would do is go and buy a paperback or a printed version of it from any of the bookstores, and the book is available. So the books which the awarding body prescribes are predominantly prescribed for getting a bit more reading into what has been covered in the indicative content of the unit. Because you can't get 100% of the knowledge, from attending a live lecture, because there is at master's level, you might need to do your own research. For example, just to give you an example, like because you've asked a question, let's look at performance management techniques. There are 17, 18 different performance management techniques. You need to be aware of all the techniques, but you might not use all of them. What is balanced scorecard, or what is management by objective, or what is, for example, rewards and incentive schemes? You might be aware of some of them, but if you want to go into detailing of it, what is going to happen is you're going to go into the book, you're going to look at, finding out what are reward schemes, look at that chapter wherein reward schemes are given, or rewards and incentives are discussed. And within that, reward management strategy and systems on page 357, for example, you would go in and you would essentially look at reading a few paragraphs or a few pages to understand what is reward management. And then this will be substantiated by a case study of an example with some quizzes, and that would give you the concept and its detail, which would be required maybe to do your assignment, so that you have good knowledge and you can write it in your own words. So what you read, you paraphrase and you write it in your own words. Do you get my point? Right. But we are going to cover, we are going to cover this in adequate detail on the presentation slides. There will be some handouts. There'll be our precise filtered handouts of 3, 4, 5 pages that will be sometimes provided with certain learning outcomes, because, frankly speaking, I don't have the time to read 20 pages. I'm looking at doing this qualification for A, B, C reason. I want to get knowledge about it, but I also want to understand why and how it is done. And that is where a concise handout that I will provide will help you study and get that knowledge. And they will come from the books, because I can't create them on my own. And I am, as a lecturer, got used to obviously teaching some of these concepts for years. And what I do see is that students always want concise, filtered information with an example to understand how do I apply MBO by objectives. So management by objectives at the end of the year, if you're a director of training or director of clinical, clinical director in a hospital, or you're somebody who's the people's director in a hospital, you'd be given some KRAs, key result areas. So key result areas would be improving the customer experience. Okay, last year it was 60%. This year we want to take it to 70%. That will be management by objectives. Now, if you reach that 70%, the management would reward you accordingly. There would be an employee stock option plan, maybe an incentive trip given, maybe a cash reward or a bonus given, or a promotion which will be given. And that is how you would manage people at the senior level. And I would need to employ what is called a technique called MBO, wherein I need to give qualitative objectives, which are going to be given time. The person being given those objectives is going to be given adequate time, 12 months, 18 months, because some of these objectives cannot be fulfilled. It's not a sales objective. It is not something which is binary. Either you meet it, not meet it. These are objectives which require lots and lots of things to happen, processes to be streamlined, improved, changes to be done, and that is when it will allow you to improve. And these things will be then seen over a point in time. Experience of patients in the hospital does not, no hospital can turn around bad experience into a good experience in a year's time. It will have to happen over a period of time, 2 years, 3 years, and generally then the accepted patterns will be that. And that is why this kind of a target management, performance management will be done by, for senior employees. Somebody who works at the administration level, at the reception level, they will have a turnaround time, calls to be picked up in 5 rings, or patients to be provided this information. Marketing would do their own bits of team, and those are going to be objectives which are going to be set as KPIs, key result or key performance indicators. And at the end of the year, they might get a bonus for it because they've done their job well. And that is where you will need to study them and then use an example to quote it within the health and social care sector. Do you get it? So in some cases, some of these would be we need to put it into context. You're not doing a PhD. You're not looking at, also skimming through some bits of it because it's a level 7 program. But what you want to do is strike a balance of what is required to be done and studied in order to be able to, let's say, gain a good foothold on this unit and understand why it is required and, what is required to be studied, and then achieve the unit and gaining knowledge and experience. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Good stuff. So let's start off briefly, with the learning outcome itself. Now, the learning outcome of the unit, first learning outcome talks about understanding recruitment selection process. Can you put on your thinking hat and see what all happens in recruitment and selection? Just if you've seen recruitment or selection happening in a particular organization, can you think of some of the things which happen in this process?
Yes, sir. Interviews.
Correct. So interview is one part of the recruitment and selection process. Anything else that you think happens?
So first is interviews, and then they select accordingly. They select some of the people, and it's easier for them to eliminate people according to their criteria. The criteria that the company or anything is offering that method.
That is correct. So if you start and maybe look at from a point of view of, if I now wear the HR manager's hat, and if I look at what are the various steps involved in, for example, recruitment and selection, what I would do is primarily, look at bringing this image in, which will help us probably understand 3-4 slides. Now, if I look at briefly, just very briefly, first and foremost would be that you would identify a need, that there is a requirement to add a headcount within the organization. So in hospitals, as they start to get more patients and, the hospital starts to become busier, at some stage, people are required to work in admin, various other departments, and the person who is responsible for recruitment would be given a task and objective to say, okay, we need this much headcount or increase of headcount this year. And what they will do is start identifying the need, that is, there is a requirement for adding new people. Then after that, they will start writing a job description for that particular role, if it is not already there. The job description would cover key roles and responsibilities, areas wherein this person would come in and work, and what objectives it would help fulfill when they do their job role or their responsibilities in terms of executing them. And that would be done with a correlation to maybe benchmarking it against another hospital or a competitor to see if this is a role which is also there in that organization. What does that role do? How much do they pay? What kind of experience they look at? What are the academic qualification? And that would require job analysis to be done. After that, the HR person or the department would actually advertise internally on the intranet, maybe with employees, look at an advertising agency or a recruitment agency, not an advertising, recruitment agency, to put out an advert to say, we are looking at recruiting, say 10 people in nursing, and this is the requirement. You give them a job description and you details that what you want to do, which area, location, time, pay scale, all those things would be sent out. And then you start getting CVs. You start screening the applications. When you start getting CVs, you screen them to see experience, keywords, and at some stage you get into the process of shortlisting those candidates that you will bring for an interview process. Once the interview process, you have got sufficient number of candidates to do the interview process will start. You might get in touch with the department head or the recruiting manager, and the person in HR would coordinate, and then you start bringing in candidates to do interviews. The interviews could be one first phase interview, the second interview, or a final interview. In some cases, there are practical examples also seen. You put candidates through tests, psychometric tests, some sort of an evaluative test to see whether they have enough knowledge. And then you start shortlisting the right candidates. When you shortlist candidates, then you make a shortlisting list, and then you offer them an offer. You give them a job offer. When they accept, they come into the company. You start a process of induction and recruitment. And that would mean you would train the employee on the basics of what they're required to do, ask them to get used to the organization, the vision, the mission, all that stuff. And at some stage, once they've been inducted and they're working on their own, they're flying solo, as I put it, towards the end of the year, you'll have performance evaluation to see how the employee did or how has the employee performed. And this performance appraisal or performance appraisal techniques, which are used under the process, would then estimate the value the person has added to the organization in terms of work, maybe bringing in business or helping in improve customer experience, or look at solving problems, whatever responsibilities are given. And this process would be the process of recruitment and selection. You might also put an employee into some sort of training simply because they might not have all the necessary skills or experience, prior experience. And in those cases, you would take the person through by putting them into training and development as well. And that would allow the person to perform to their best possible capability. Is that okay? So this image basically summarizes what would be the process of recruitment and selection, which is the overarching message that we want to get by studying learning outcome 1. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now let's watch a quick video. Let's say a 2-minute video. And that video we want to watch because we want to understand what I've explained visually, to see if this is something that we can relate to. So what is the process of recruitment and selection? What is recruitment? Basically, this video talks about and just briefly summarizes, what is the recruitment process and probably what, the role of recruitment agencies is. Now, I would have wanted to get a better video to be able to explain this, but just generally, the idea was to try and go through something which is explained to you verbally, and then obviously some of the steps which are involved in the process of recruitment and selection. And generally speaking, when we look at this process, it might vary in different organizations depending on the needs and requirements. And what we are going to focus on in Learning Outcome 1 is to look at what is recruitment, what is selection, what are the benefits of planning and doing planning around this process of recruitment and selection, which helps organizations to, better, let's say, recruit good people which are required to fill roles or, vacancies within the organization. How do you vet candidates? How do you look at, making sure that you're choosing suitable candidates for those positions which are required to be filled? And what is the role of, agencies or some of the partners that you work with regards to helping you complete this process of recruitment and selection? Now, with this, let's go into the first assessment criteria. That background helps us understand what is recruitment, what is the process of recruitment, how recruitment is generally done. And the first part of the assessment criteria talks about here, what are the factors involved in planning of recruitment in health and social care? Now we need to contextualize it and discuss it in detail, but specifically with regards to health and social care sector. So if we put on the thinking hats and then look at it from a point of view of, how you would recruit, say, for example, in a hospital, in a surgery, in a pharmacy, or in any sort of a health and social care setup like a care home or an old age home, what we need to look at is putting those essential fundamental processes which are used in recruitment selection and then put them to use, but maybe tailoring them to the usage of how do we recruit people in health and social care sector. So one of the things that we look at sometimes, when you're looking at, let's put it this way, recruiting people within health and social care is that you look at what is called, workforce analysis. Sorry, workforce analysis is primarily done in order to assess what are the current workforce requirements of the organization. Are you short of workforce? Are you short of staff? That is the question that it answers. And this is normally an exercise done by HR once a year or once in 6 months to see if we are falling short of staff, if a person ends up leaving, resigning, or if there are redundancies which happen or suddenly the business is doing well, or we get more patients or people coming in to, visit the hospital or the surgery, then in those cases, at some stage, you'll have to do an introspection to see, do we have enough staff at hand or enough people at hand to be able to handle this workload? And that is what is workforce analysis. The usual bits that we do after that is, once we identify that we need a person here or a person there to be able to help do that job or help, let's say, bolster that department or hold that responsibility, you would get into what is called job description or analysis. Look at going into details of what the job will entail, what would be the salary level, what would be the roles and responsibilities given. And then in some cases, a practical example that I will give you here is, if you have a new hospital which opens up, initially starts off and they have recruited a staff of, say, 20 nurses, 5 doctors, some surgeons and things like that. And there is a lot of administrative and operative staff which runs the hospital. Maybe it's a 50-bedded hospital. But if the hospital increases from 50 bed to 100 beds in a year's time, you would generally see that a staff ratio or a nurse ratio of 1:3 cannot be maintained in an ICU if the ICU, there was one unit with 20 beds and now that has become 30 beds, you would need maybe 10 nurses to be able to manage that workload. When people are operated and they are transferred to ICU, then you would need nurses to provide proper supervision. And that nursing team would also need to have maybe, health and social care workers, assistants, and they would form a triage, which will essentially work as a team to provide the care needed for the patient to recover from the operation. So in those cases, job analysis and job descriptions and, workforce analysis would require to be done. Now, because healthcare recruitment sometimes tends to be specialist recruitment, you have to look at where all would be the recruitment coming from? Which agencies, what outlets, or what areas in which you would actually post the job advert, which will allow relevant information or relevant candidates to come in and do the interview, or help you get the right person for the right job. So in those cases, you have to look at recruitment sources as well. And in some cases, when you look at advertisement for doctors and doctors' role or nurses' role, you generally see that a lot of these setups and hospitals actually prefer to take them directly from the schools when they are freshly completing the courses, doing pre-placement talks. And in some cases, they also have specialist recruitment agencies, which would then be looking at headhunting or essentially filling those vacancies up by looking for a specialist or a specific vacancy which is required by the hospital. There are other things that you have to look at in terms of recruitment and the planning process of recruitment, is that you cannot be discriminatory, you cannot be biased. Sometimes when you look at NHS in the UK, the workforce of UK, National Health Service in the UK is cultural, and it is quite diverse. There are 40 different nationalities which work in a 1.3 million strong workforce in the NHS. And you will also see that the organization itself has certain policies and procedures which drive inclusion, which is the opposite of discrimination. They drive equality, and they want to make sure that every individual, every type of individual, irrespective of their background, race, caste, creed, religion, is given the opportunity to work within the organization. You will also look at regulatory compliance. One of the features that you look at regulatory compliance is if somebody from outside wants to come and work in the NHS, regulatory compliances would mean visas to be checked, nationalities to be checked, English proficiency level to be checked, educational level to be checked, and it's to see also that is there a local shortage in this local, is there a skilled labor shortage in the local market, and that would then allow government to allow various departments or agencies to recruit people from outside as well. So in those cases, you would look at compliances. Go on, sorry, any questions?
No, sir.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry?
So, did you have any questions?
No, sir, not up till now. I understood what you said.
Okay, so compliances could also mean that, you have to give a contract to an employee. You have to look at legislation related to the minimum hours in terms of people that would be working, holidays they would get, and some of the essential, legal related issues which HR would need to deal with to ensure that they are employing somebody who's, is allowed to work within the UK. They're employing somebody and paying somebody for the role that they do within the organization. There are minimum benefits or perks that the individual gets for the role and the responsibility they perform, and they would all be a part of compliance, which is related to acts and legislation which the government has set within the sector. Then you'll go about planning the process of recruitment, which would mean selection process. So whether you have one round of interview, 2 rounds of interview, first round would be with the manager, second with the department head. If it's a senior position, maybe with the management. How many rounds of interviews will there be? What will be the probation period? How would you confirm the candidate? How would you test their skills? What they're writing on their CV? Will it be academically tested? Will there be tests which will happen? All those things would be discussed within the candidate selection process. And at some stage, once you've done the selection and the person is assuming, taken on board, then at some stage, we see the post-operative process, which is pre-selection and post-selection. Post-selection processes in recruitment would include induction, training, development, looking at allocation of budgeting, or looking at resources. Person needs a place to sit or an office to work from, those kind of things. And then for people who are already within the organization, have been with the organization for a number of months, years, you would look at retention strategies. They'll look at succession planning in terms of their promotion planning. Succession planning tends to be a process wherein if somebody is to leave the organization prepares an individual to step into that role, and they would see them as future leaders or future people who are going to be future leaders within the organization. And they would be systematically put through a process of training and development, so that at some stage they can take up senior positions within the organization, and that would be succession planning. When we consider this as a process in whole, is going to be looked at from a point of view of planning, which is involved in recruiting, and specifically taking an example of a nurse or a doctor, would be giving you a criteria that we need to look at specialist recruitment. For example, if it's a hospital and it specializes in, say, for example, cancer research, you would need to have surgeons or consultants who are predominantly oncologists, which are predominantly, aware of cancer and cancer-related treatments, and they would need to be recruited. And in those cases, the recruitment process would need to be very specific in terms of job description, experience that you need from that candidate prior to joining the hospital, and the role and responsibilities they will pay. And that would mean that you might need a specialist recruitment agency. You might need to drop job descriptions or update them to ensure that it is not something generic, but meeting the criteria. And that would cover the assessment criteria 1.1. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Good stuff. Let's go to 1.2. It talks about explaining situations which are necessary to seek specialist expertise in relation to recruitment and selection process.
Sir, isn't this enough for today, or we have to cover this whole area too?
Well, I would want to cover probably, the full learning outcome, simply because this will help us steady. But if you feel if this is where we want to stop, I can stop and we can do balance part of it tomorrow.
Sir, I'd highly likely want you to stop because I need to understand and process everything and then go accordingly.
That's fine, no worries. So what we'll do is we'll stop today's discussion here and we'll pick it up tomorrow. It will help us nicely do this bit in the next week and the next week after that, because we have one session on discussion of assignment, and obviously the next day was free in any case, so that can be broken up into 2 sessions, not a problem. All the other learning outcomes have 1 or 2 criteria, so they would be okay to cover in the individual sessions. But because we had a bit of an introduction on the unit as well today, and the idea was to try and give you information, so I'm happy that we can stop here today and then pick it up from tomorrow. No worries. Hopefully, we'll
thank you, sir. Okay,
no worries.
You go ahead.
No, hopefully I will.
Sir, I wanted to ask if I want to. Okay, you go ahead. I'll ask after that.
No, that's fine. I'm hoping that Kutub will be also able to join some of the sessions with us tomorrow, because I think she's missed out on this information. So it'll be good for her to cover some bits of it with us tomorrow. No worries.
Okay, sir. So I was asking if I have to open Moodle on phone, and then where I can find the recorded lecture that is held today in order to revise it in my mind or so.
So what you'll have to do with us for the duration of the course that you're going to study with us, you need to be also going to our YouTube channel, and that is a link which I will drop on WhatsApp right now, and that would allow you to subscribe to the channel. And here is where the live lectures, under live, if you go, you'll be able to see the lectures will automatically all come here. So it'll say OTHM level 7 social care management. This is unit managing people, and it'll say learning outcome 1. So this lecture that we've done today and the discussion we've done today is actually live on the YouTube. But once we finish and close today, you'll be able to revisit this lecture under the live section, of the YouTube channel. So I've dropped you a link on that, and all you need to do is go in and subscribe. When we have the new sessions being done or recordings being uploaded, you'll get a message straight away to say a new lecture or a new session has been uploaded, and you would also be able to see them from the YouTube straight away by going to the live section. These lectures are quite heavy.
Okay, sir.
These lectures are quite heavy in terms of, recordings, in terms of gigabytes. So obviously we don't put them on Moodle. The lectures would be available on YouTube, and the teaching and learning material, presentation, handouts, all those things will be available upon Moodle.
Okay, sir, no issues. Also, I had to make a request. Please drop the link for tomorrow's class on my WhatsApp, as I don't receive anything on Gmail. So that creates a problem then.
That's perfectly okay. I will make this a practice, and I'm going to drop the link because I think, Kutub also did not get it on the email for some reason. But I'm going to drop that
Yes,
link
sir.
a couple of minutes before the session when we start.
Okay. So I just need to clear one query. I understood all that you said, and what I understood from your point is that the information or the material that is required for us to study or that is required for us to make assignments, 80% is covered in your books, and the material you're already sharing. If we willingly want to go into additional research, we can go to Google or other stuff we can. Is that all right? Or
Yes.
I understood
Perfect.
wrong?
No, that's perfect. That's how it is going to be. Yes.
Sure, sir.
That's brilliant. No problem. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for joining in today. I will catch up with you tomorrow. And till then, bye for now.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for taking the lesson.